Peter, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you, pal?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. Glad you could join us, share a little bit of your thoughts, get some insight into why you're running for Congress, why you think you are so uniquely qualified to be a member of the House. So why don't we start there? What made you decide I want to get into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's probably one I've been asked more than any other since I decided to kick this whole affair off earlier this year. And I think the answer's kind of changed or evolved over the last few months. So when I started, it was definitely because I was angry. I think anybody going into the inauguration earlier this year understood, if we'd been paying attention, that 2025 was going to be a rough year, and probably the next 4 years were going to be challenging. The Republican Party was pretty transparent if you were reading between the lines. Project 2025 was the roadmap. The Trump administration, we had been through one before. We knew that there were going to be some challenges coming into this. And I think that's a fair assessment. And then it happened, right? And I think the speed at which all of the bad stuff started to come into play was more even than I really anticipated, than I think a lot of people anticipated. And it started directly touching not just myself, but people that are really close to me. So I have a couple of brothers that they serve in the federal government that have prior military experience. My parents are prior military. My wife's family was. I was headed that route. I work in higher education. My wife works in higher education. I have a really special soft spot in my heart for the value of a college education. And I live in a fairly rural area, right? So I live in Cache Valley, which is northern Utah, and we're a college town, but we have a lot of rural communities surrounding us, and within the district, there's a lot of rural populations. And almost immediately, the things that started to be impacted were things that impacted the people that I'm close to, right, and the communities that I live in. So I saw attacks on education. I saw attacks on the federal workforce. I saw attacks on things like access to healthcare for rural communities. And my initial response really was just I was angry. Um, that has tempered a little bit. I won't say that I'm not still angry. I think I still am. But I think that anger has evolved into a real desire to channel that in an effective way. And that has happened because I've talked to a lot of different people throughout what is probably going to be my district. Utah's in the middle of a redistricting conversation right now. And so the lines are still a little fuzzy. But the people that are likely to be in my district, as I have met with them, as I've had phone calls, as I've gone to events, it's really been this recognition, I guess, on my part that I want to see them have more. I know it's cliche and it's canned, but I want to see them have more opportunities tomorrow than they do today. I have three daughters, and they have fewer rights now than their mom did, or even their grandma did at their age. And I look at my brother's families, and I look at the families of the people that live in my community. I look at the university that I still teach for as an adjunct, and I see the direct impact that our current policies are having at the federal level on the people that I know and that I love and that I trust, and then the broader community around us. And none of it is good. And I genuinely feel like I have an obligation to serve my community in a way that makes their life better. And that's kind of where this has pivoted from. It started from place, I'm just angry, I've got to do something now. And that's still there. Like it's a recognition that if we don't do something now, we might not have the opportunity to do something in the future. That it is serious, and that's still there. But it's this desire, I think, to try and give back a little bit of what I have been given over the 40 years of my life. My family has always been involved in public service, and I don't know that I'll be in a place where I am today where I have the opportunity to do good in this specific way, like I do right now. And so I want to do that. I want to try and help people within my community have a better tomorrow than they do today. And I get it. I know it sounds cliche, but that really is a driving motivator for me at this point.
Yeah, I think that's if I could give anybody any advice that's interested in politics, whether you want to run, whether you just want to be an activist, whatever it is, anger is great. Anger can motivate you, but if you never harness that anger into something productive, into a plan, into, an actual thought, it's just anger. And all you're doing is yelling at that point and you'll get nowhere. Your anger will be wasted. But you talked about a lot of the impacts on rural communities. Sounds like that's going to be a huge initiative in your district. Let's start with healthcare. The big beautiful bill has Medicaid cuts that don't start until 2027.
Yep.
The idea was we'll wait until the midterms and then we won't have to worry about it. But many hospitals and healthcare centers are saying, okay, thanks for letting us know these cuts are coming. We're going to start making cuts now. Are you seeing that in your district?
I think to some extent, yes. I've talked with several senior living centers, and those senior living communities are already starting to feel the impact of that because in a lot of cases they are like they're Medicaid dependent, right? So they're the only way that they're able to provide a service or a level of care is through federal dollars. And the organizations that they work with and how they plan, they don't just plan 2 weeks out, right? They're planning sometimes months or even a couple of years out. And the fact that this is on the horizon, they have to start thinking about, well, how do we remain solvent, not just next month, but next year or next decade? And that means that they have to start making hard budgetary decisions today. And so there are some real concerns that the level of care that they're able to provide, either you shrink the level of care or you shrink the population that you're directly supporting, or you try and find more dollars. And in the current landscape, that last option of trying to find more dollars is not particularly an easy one. And so they're really stuck with these two kind of terrible options, right? Do I serve less people or do I serve the same amount of people but give them worse service? And that's not a position that any of these people want to be in. And when you talk to, I think, nurses or healthcare providers in rural towns, this is not a unique situation. They're stuck kind of with the same kind of uh, Sophie's choice, right? Like, do I serve fewer people or do I provide the same level of care with the same level of care, or do I like what am I going to do here? Or do I just have less of a population that I'm able to support? And this isn't really the first time that we have seen policy impacts on rural communities from a healthcare perspective with this administration. And I know this doesn't directly tie to the big beautiful bill, but when we saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and we see the abortion debate kind of move completely back to the state level, well, currently back at the state level, Idaho is 15 minutes from us, right? I'm on the northern Utah border between Utah and Idaho. And Idaho is currently facing a significant dearth of OBGYNs and other healthcare providers specifically focused on women's health because of a policy orientation that now makes them afraid to practice healthcare when it comes to women's reproductive health. And so they're fleeing the state, which means that women now no longer have access to the same quality of care that they would have had that policy not been modified in the restrictive way that it had. We take that, we look at Medicaid and we look at healthcare in general here in Utah, specifically within the first district and some of these rural communities. I don't see that there's any likely outcome where this sort of policy change that restricts access to healthcare has a positive net outcome for rural communities. The Rural Healthcare Alliance was already saying they anticipate millions, potentially millions of people losing access to healthcare services as a result, a direct result of the big beautiful bill and the legislation that reapportions money away from those kinds of healthcare services. So you're right. Like this is definitely going to be a concern. And while the original intention was to make sure the pain wasn't felt until after the midterm election cycle, organizations don't have the luxury of waiting to make their plans until the second Tuesday in November. They have to think about it now, and that's already starting to have some ripple effects. I think those ripples will get larger.
Yeah, what's when Blake Moore gets into your district and talks to the people there, what is he saying? What's his response to what's happening?
Mm. It's interesting that you bring that up because we just had a town hall a few weeks ago that I was able to kind of go just to see what the mood would be like. Um, I would say it was spicy. Like I would say that was a fairly spicy event. When healthcare questions were brought up specifically, I think Representatives Moore had two main talking points. The first was we'll look at the child tax credit, right? Like, so I've got this child tax credit that I fought for, and that is supposed to offset all of the other expenses that you're going to have now. I don't think the math works out there for most members, like most citizens in Utah, especially not in our district. And then I think the other was, well, healthcare's just too expensive, right? We had to make cuts to Medicaid. Medicaid's too expensive. So let's just go ahead and bite the bullet and do it now. And I mean, on one hand, it's not wrong to say that Medicaid is expensive. It is. Healthcare costs are expensive in the United States. On the other hand, as I think about how we prioritize our policy making, I think I'd rather prioritize people than corporations, and I'd rather prioritize the middle class than billionaires. And so if we're gonna dictate policy that prioritizes limited resources, well, healthcare is pretty high on that list. I'd rather have healthcare for a broad cross section of Americans than to give billionaires a tax break or to give corporations more leeway to go ahead and make even more money than they already are. That I think is a striking difference between myself and our current representative is I think our policy should be people oriented, not necessarily corporate or billionaire oriented.
Yeah, that's a wild thing to say to people. Like, healthcare is expensive, so we had to cut back and make it more expensive for you guys. Like, we know healthcare is expensive. That's why we're talking to you right now. That is a wild response. But I guess when you don't really have one, you kind of put into a position where something like that will come out of your mouth.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is also, again, how you prioritize what you think is the most important part for government. I mean, the deficit is a real thing. It is. Like, and we have concerns, generationally speaking, that we have a large of deficit as we do. I don't know that Representative Moore has balanced a checkbook in a while. He comes from a pretty wealthy background in his status. I do know, however, that when you are balancing a checkbook, it's not just about reducing expenses, it's about also trying to find additional income. And I think a lot of fiscal conservatives are putting themselves in a position where they're either unable or unwilling to go ahead and say, you know what we need right now? We need to go ahead and have everybody pay their fair share. And so let's go ahead and find those additional revenue streams. Let's fund the organizations that we know help drive revenue. So let's fund the IRS and help them audit people who are incredibly wealthy. Again, that billionaire 1%, because there's a lot of money that we are just not effectively bringing into our system. And that could go a long way towards helping mitigate our deficit crisis, right? It's fiscal conservatism, sure, but it's oriented on people, not necessarily, like I said, on protecting a corporate class or protecting a very small percentage of the population. It's saying, listen, everybody benefited from the social structures we have. Everybody's benefited from the infrastructure of roads and public education and access to public services. So we all need to go ahead and help and pay our fair share if the system's going to continue to function effectively. And I just don't think that ideologically they're in a place where that's even an option for them. Speaking largely of fiscal Republicans that have kind of waved that banner as long as they have,
Yeah, they do wave the banner of fiscal responsibility. And
and then
yet
drive the debt up every time we have a
every
Republican president.
when I tell people that since I've been alive, Carter was the first president, or he was president when I was born. Um, give you an idea how old I am. It's in my lifetime the only Democratic president to not lower the deficit is Carter. The rest, the Republicans, every single one, Reagan, the two Bushes, and Trump raised the deficit, but yet they'll swear they're the party of being fiscally conservative. Right now, the getting back to healthcare,
Yeah.
the Democrats are holding. They've drawn a line in the sand, and they've said, "Look, we're not going to do your continuing resolution. We've got these ACA subsidies, we've got Medicaid cuts, among other things, but these are their big issues that we need to talk about." Do you think they're going about it the right way to fight for those, or do you think they should just fund it and fight later? What would you do if you were in Congress now?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think the reality is the Democrats are a minority party across all three, right? So we have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican executive branch in the White House. I would argue we also have a Republican Supreme Court, although that's not supposed to matter at the Supreme Court. I think we have a conservative Supreme Court. Um, so as a minority party, you have very few levers potentially to pull to go ahead and prioritize your particular set of interests. Republicans have certainly held the government hostage in the past when they had policy priorities that they felt were not being appropriately addressed. And Democrats right now find themselves in the minority in all three cases, and across the government. And I think it's interesting the fight that they have chosen to pick. Right. So I'm a Democratic candidate, and as I look at this, what do I prioritize? I prioritize the health of Americans and I prioritize access to basic services. And I'm telling my Republican colleagues, listen, like we can have a conversation about this. That's I think one of the most interesting, if not like frustrating aspects of this is the Republican leadership won't even come to the table to have the conversation, which is what governance looks like, right? So we're not talking about a dictatorship where you just get to rule by fiat. We're talking about a democracy where when you have two different political parties, the idea is to compromise and figure out a solution that works for everybody. And a good compromise usually leaves everybody mad, right? Like nobody's walking away with 100% of what they wanted. And I think Democratic leadership has been pretty clear. Like we're not asking you to roll back the big beautiful bill. We get it. You own Congress and you own the White House. You passed your legislative priorities. But we're telling you that you're negatively harming millions of Americans with some of those priorities that you passed. We need to have a conversation about that. At the very least, we need to negotiate a way to go ahead and reduce those harms. And Republicans won't even come to the table. I think if I was currently serving Congress, I would absolutely support this, at least until Republicans are willing to come to the table. I mean, I think it's interesting when Marjorie Taylor Greene is coming out and telling her Republican colleagues, guys, I think we're like you're in the wrong on this one. This is not a great place for us to be to say that, the thing we're going to hold out on is harming millions of Americans. That's the line that we're going to go ahead and hold to is let's keep harming millions of Americans. So yeah, I'm with it, right? Like at least until you have an honest conversation about what this looks like, you need to hold firm and say, I'm here to protect Americans. So let's talk about this, and then you can get our vote. Like if we trust that that conversation is going to go forward, but at the very least, we got to have that conversation. And Republicans have been unwilling to do that.
Yeah, the Marjorie Taylor Greene, man, I have to imagine, I wish I could have been in the room when Mike Johnson heard her for the first time. Like
Yeah.
what must have gone through his head? And I can't think of the speaker before Johnson who got ousted and then resigned.
Oh, he's in California now. What's his bucket?
Yeah.
Um,
But I he must have
yeah.
been smiling ear to ear, just like just couldn't be happier that this whole thing is happening. Um, Today, change it up a little bit. Today, Donald Trump during a Oval Office press conference with the leader of Argentina said to the camera, to the American people, grocery prices are way down. Is that what you're seeing in Utah? Because New York, it does not feel like that.
Well, I can just tell you today. So I went to the store and I bought 3.5 pounds of chicken and some bread and two lemons, some lettuce, and some seasoning. Because I'm making dinner tonight. My wife and I trade off on dinner nights. And that cost me $40. And I get that the seasoning was like five, right? So fancy seasonings. Um, but a grocery bill that was $35 for 3.5 pounds of chicken, some bread, a couple of lemons, and some lettuce. That is not what it used to be. That is chicken that's probably at least twice as expensive, I think, as I have seen it in the past. I mean, this is $4 or $5 a pound for chicken. In the past, it was $2 a pound. Um, I don't think I have seen grocery prices translated into this 5,000% drop that I have heard they were supposed to be at one point. I know that our home budget grocery bill is certainly higher than it has been in the past. I've got three teenage girls, and I know that's part of it, but the other part of it is just the fact we are paying more for milk and for eggs and for meat than we ever have. A box of cereal is $5 to $6. A box of freaking cereal is $5 to $6. And so when you talk about trying to feed a family, I genuinely don't know what the expectation is anymore because the median wage in our area is about $49,000 a year. And the upper quartile is about 75 to 80, I think, depending on where you want to draw some lines. If you had two people, like, so my wife and I, we both work, we have three kids. We thankfully make more than that median income because I've been in the workforce for a while, and so has she. And I was able to get a college education, and so was she. And so we have been very fortunate to find employment that allows us to be employed above that median income. And we still find things are tight when we look at a grocery bill and a mortgage payment and the other costs of just living today. I'm not seeing it. Like, I'm not seeing it here in Utah. Lower grocery prices have not yet made it our way. Maybe it's a carve out for a zip code in Florida. Maybe Mar-a-Lago has experienced that, but we certainly haven't.
Yeah, so I think people are looking for answers because Donald Trump successfully ran in 2024 in dropping grocery prices. He had a press conference in front of a box of Cheerios and said, "Hey, I'm going to make this cheaper for you." As you said, cereal is $6 a box. It's smaller than it ever was, and there's no prize inside. Um,
Yep.
so people are looking for answers now. They were promised, the last guy was gonna fix this. So if you get to Congress, what do you think you could do? Is there any lever you would have that could help stabilize prices and maybe bring some of those food prices down?
Well, I think the very first thing that we would want to do is assert congressional authority over tariffs. Like, I think that's a really kind of easy, sort of straightforward answer. And easy is probably the wrong way to describe this because I'm sure it would be a legislative challenge. But if you had a Democratic Congress, so Democrats are in the majority, or you had a Republican Congress with a backbone, we wouldn't have the tariff environment that we have right now. So I see reports of soybean farmers that have now lost an entire market in China because we just paid Argentina $20 billion and then Argentina reached a trade deal with China. So now China's getting their soybeans from Argentina. So we've gotten nailed twice over. We are charging every other country that we do business with huge amounts of tariff dollars to go ahead and continue to have American consumers. And I don't think the Republican legislature and certainly not our current president realize the world is a big place. You can go somewhere else for a market. The United States is a huge economy. It is. It's the largest economy in the world, but we're not the only economy. And I think the very first thing that we would want to do from a congressional perspective is to go ahead and say, actually, Congress controls the tariff power, not the White House. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to start to legislate where we think tariffs are and are not appropriate. Tariffs are supposed to be a strategic tool, right? They're supposed to go ahead and help you protect a strategic industry need within the country. They're supposed to be a lever to help you guide or direct a specific kind of trade conversation. They're not supposed to be just this general widespread, we tariff everybody. That's protectionism. That's the old school mercantilism that happened before we had free market engagement. And that kind of tariff action is creating significant economic stress. I mean, I've got a brother-in-law, right, who is an electrician. And I was talking to him about this. It used to be that when he would go to show up for work, there was 100+ guys waiting around, and most of them, if not everybody, had a job by the time the work assignments were doled out. They're down to 30 or 40, right? And not everybody gets a job at the end of the day. And so I think if we're going to talk about a real practical solution that members of Congress have the authority to do that would make an immediate difference in the lives of Americans, it's reasserting congressional authority over the tariff structure and immediately backing those off and entering into strategic conversations with our trade partners to say, all right, let's actually figure out what makes sense here. And let's not just tell everybody they have to pay us billions of dollars, which directly translates to the American consumer having to pay those billions of dollars.
Yeah, you talked about Congress taking back control of the tariffs, which would be absolutely amazing. However, right now the Supreme Court has said they're going to take up whether or not Donald Trump can just declare an economic emergency. Now, you already said it. The Supreme Court is essentially Republican, right? They side with Donald Trump, and they seem like they probably will, if I had to guess, again on tariffs. I say all that to say that if you get to Congress, if you specifically win, Democrats are taking the House. That means there was a
Yeah.
blue wave and they have the House. So how do you work then with Donald Trump? Because he's still going to have the power of the tariffs. So what do you think you could do? And more importantly, do you ever think about you yourself and your ability to talk with Donald Trump directly, or do you think that would be an exercise in futility?
Um, so I think the House itself is an easier question. Well, I won't say easier. It's a broader question. There we go. It's a broader question. So I think if Democrats take the House, the very first thing that needs to happen is congressional oversight. And quite frankly, that is a fairly significant deterrent to the kinds of governmental abuses that we have seen. Because if for like if it does nothing else, it now requires the executive branch to start walking through and dotting all their I's and crossing all of their T's. And that means that anything that they wanted to do that was illegal or maybe in a gray area suddenly can't happen overnight. It now take months, if not years, to go ahead and enact that kind of work. That's one of the powers that the House has through congressional oversight, is to make sure that the governance structure becomes deliberate. And that can absolutely be abused, right? That can, and both sides, I think, neither is blameless in using Congress to go ahead and slow roll things that might need to happen. But it is, I think, still an effective check that if you have a Democratic House, you likely might have a Democratic Senate as well. And so now the president can't just rule by fiat because Congress has rolled over. The president has to work within the structures of the US government and say, okay, there is going to be some give and take. And so I think that's immediately one of the things that we can look forward to, is that if Democrats retake Congress, both the House and the Senate, the government starts to function as designed. We don't have this slow roll into authoritarianism. We have a functioning democracy with some healthy back and forth, hopefully, but it works as designed. Me personally, I've never met President Trump. I haven't had a conversation with him. I don't know the man as an individual. I have talked to a lot of different people across the course of my life, many of whom I have disagreed with. At the end of the day, we're still humans, right? Like, we're still Americans. Hopefully, we still have, at least in the government perspective, that's our priority, is America, like, as a nation first. So we're concerned about the needs of American citizens. I'm concerned about the needs of my district. Those are my top two priorities, right? Am I upholding the Constitution? Am I supporting Americans? Am I taking care of the people in my district? And then everything after that, like, those are low priority, because those are my two main concerns. And if that means that President Trump wants to have a conversation about healthcare, for example, and he says, well, fine, we can go ahead and reach a healthcare solution, but we have to, we have to figure out this immigration crisis. Great, let's go ahead and figure out what it looks like to have a clear pathway to citizenship for people that are coming into the country. Let's have a conversation about the role that immigrants actually play in the United States. And let's have clear guidelines, and let's see congressional and constitutional authority upheld in the enforcement of immigration. And then let's go ahead and have the conversation about healthcare, and we'll have a give and take. That's what governance looks like, right? This is the conversation, and it's give and take. Until I'm actually sitting across the table from President Trump, I don't know that I would say one way or the other that this is a man I can or can't work with. I think that would require an actual conversation.
Okay. Yeah, we I kind of hinted at it. Your district is a red district.
Mhm.
Representative Moore won by 30 points, I think,
Yep.
in 2024. Very solid. But at the same time, we've seen in Iowa's fifth Senate House or state Senate, their first, Alabama's 10th state House district. These are ruby red areas that flipped. Um, and despite that, despite the Democrats winning, pulling these upsets, their poll numbers are still really low. Republicans are still really low. So while people are still going to vote, they don't trust politicians across the board. Why do you think that is? What do you think is the disconnect between someone like yourself who is getting in? And I'm not talking about you personally, but there's plenty of people that like you that have gotten into politics, where they come from the people, they know our experience, they get there, and it seems like they instantly forget. And what do you think is the disconnect there? And how do you think politicians, especially Congress, rebuild trust?
Um, yeah, I think it's complex. In that there's no one silver bullet, right? Like, there's no one answer that cleanly or neatly explains this. I do think part of it has to do with the fact that, at least in recent memory, so I'm not as old as Carter. Reagan was my first president, that I was alive for. I think there's a couple of things that have happened. First, I don't think politics stops at the border anymore. And there used to be this idea that you could have domestic conversations back and forth, but at the end of the day, anybody who is serving in the government understands that we're all Americans, right? And so we have some unified priorities, and we're going to go ahead and focus on those unified priorities, and then we'll have conversations about the other stuff. I don't know that that still exists to the same extent that it did when I was a kid, right? So the Soviet Union fell, the United States became this unipolar superpower within the international community. And a lot of this, the external concern that bound American politics together has kind of dissipated. Um, so I think that's one reason why. I think another reason why is that historically, throughout the legislative process, at least, Americans were represented by individuals that understood they had some ability or capacity to individually represent their district. And that was by, quite frankly, bringing home the pork, right? So that there was the ability to go ahead and say, I'm going to fund projects that benefit my district. And that gives me some political cover to go ahead and vote against party lines. So maybe I'm a Democrat in a conservative state, but my district knows that I have their best interests in mind. And so I'm going to vote in a way that benefits my district. And politically speaking, my party, like I'm protected from party backlash because my district is going to continue to support me because they know I'm here to support them. A lot of that has kind of gone by the wayside as we have seen more and more ideological purity tests happen on both sides of the fence with Republicans and I think sometimes with Democrats. And what that has meant is that a lot of our policy making is now ideologically driven, and it's not necessarily pragmatic, and it's not necessarily focusing on the needs of Americans. It's focusing on whether or not I pass an ideological purity test. Um, and what this has resulted in now is legislative representatives that put the party before the country and the district. And I think that we see this more and more regularly, where an individual who has been elected to serve the needs of their constituents now finds themselves unable to do that because their party demands loyalty. And I am going to call out Representative Moore very specifically here. Representative Moore, when he was first elected five years ago now, he was a moderate Republican, and I think a lot of people, he had a background. He had served in the federal civil service, and so there was this anticipation that here was going to be a good representative of our district, right? We got 30,000 federal workers. We have a military base. We have a really strong presence, federal worker presence. Here's somebody that gets it. He goes to Congress. He's he's a very productive freshman legislator. He gets involved in a lot of different kind of legislative priorities. And then he became a member of the Republican Party leadership. This has happened over the last year. And now Representative Moore does whatever Mike Johnson and Donald Trump tell him to do because that's his role, right? His priority isn't the district, and it's not even necessarily Americans. It's what does the Republican Party tell me is my talking points. I think the Epstein file vote is a huge indicator of this, right? He represents a district that is predominantly LDS, so members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They are pretty moral people, right? Like they are individuals that live their Christianity. So they go to church regularly, they donate tons of time to service opportunities. They have a really strong kind of moral center. And we saw this in the 2016 election. When Trump won the state, it wasn't with a majority, it was with a plurality because it was actually a three-horse race.
Yeah.
Most Utahns didn't vote for Trump in 2016 because Trump represented an amoral figure. And there was a lot of pushback, I think, against that. So why is our representative then not at the forefront of the conversation of saying, here is a list of known pedophiles and child traffickers, regardless of political orientation, these aren't people that we want to be protecting, right? Like this is a group of individuals that are actively bringing harm or who have actively brought harm to some of the most vulnerable members of our community. We should go ahead and that's something we can all agree on. That's not good, right? Like we don't want those people to be protected. They should face justice. Why isn't he at the forefront of that conversation? Well, because Donald Trump and Mike Johnson don't want that to be something that is talked about. And so he falls in line and he doesn't push for it and he doesn't represent the moral values of the people in his district. And I think we see that again and again in our representatives, which is where that trust breaks down. Is they stop serving their communities, they stop serving American values, and they serve political party preference. And that I think is particularly damaging. And that's universal, whether this is a Republican doing it or a Democrat doing it or somebody else. The minute that we stop serving the people that we have been elected to serve and stop serving American values and instead serve party loyalty, we're going to cause fractures in the system. And I think there are things that we can do to help mitigate that, right? I think one of the things, quite frankly, is we should probably have term limits for Congress. I think that it is probably time to go ahead and have that as a serious conversation. We should definitely prevent members of Congress from trading individual stock. Like that's just corruption. Straight up, it's corruption. I should not be trading stock, and my immediate family should not be trading stock for the companies that I myself regulate and know what's going to impact. Right? Like that's entirely inappropriate. So I think there's some system or structural changes that we could make that would make it easier for representatives who get elected, I think, with the idea that they're going to be good public servants and then get pulled into a system that doesn't incentivize them to be good public servants. It incentivizes them to be good party members. And that's not American democracy. Washington warned us about this in his farewell address. Partisan politics are a problem. And he knew they were a problem then, and they're a problem today. And so I really think that we want to elect people that, regardless of political party orientation, are very clear in saying, my first loyalty is to the Constitution, my second loyalty is to my district. My party loyalty should be pretty far down on the list.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the purity test, which is, we see it. Lindsey Graham, uh, after after January 6th, of course, he called out Trump and said he was done. Let's just get this over with. Biden won. He's followed in the airport. He's called a traitor, and now he's back 100% Trump. You've
Yep.
got John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, who is praises Trump for the Middle East ceasefire, and all of a sudden he's the bad guy for doing that. There is a You've got to meet these you got to check these boxes, or we're not interested. We're not having it. And yeah, I don't know. I think the what the answer is, I have no idea, because ultimately there's going to be what you're probably looking at, say 20 new members of Congress, freshman members. They're all coming in with the same idea. I am going to be different. And before you know it, whatever happens, it's not all the time, but a lot of the times they just fall in line. So speaking of purity tests, I'd like to give you one now. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I got a few things I want to touch on. Make sure we get you on the record on, and
Sure.
yes or no. You can give a short answer. Give me a little bit of grade. Just don't bloviate too much. Um, the Trump administration has recently suggested raising the age before you can collect Social Security benefits. Is that something you would be for? Would you have a different plan in mind?
I think before we look at raising the age, we look at making sure the wealthiest pay a fair share of taxes. And if that still isn't covering the gap, then we can go ahead and talk about raising the age.
Okay. The We talked a little bit about women's health care, reproductive rights. Um, would you be for reinstituting Roe v. Wade and the protections that it
Yeah,
covered?
abortion and any kind of healthcare really should be between an individual, their doctor, and if they're religious, their God. Like that's, as a legislator, I'm not a medical expert. So let's go ahead and give people access to as many rights as we can.
Yeah. Talked about term limits and stocks. A big thing is corporate money in politics. And that's, we talked about what happens to politicians, and money is sometimes a big part of it. They get these donors, they come in, these special interest groups, give you a lot of money, and all of a sudden you're on their talking points. Are you going to accept corporate money if it aligns with your values?
No.
No, none at all. Um,
Nope. There's some PACs out there that I think that do good work. So there's like the Women's League of Voters in Utah. They're phenomenal. And there's some other organizations like that, but I will not accept PAC money that is corporately financed. And I actually think Citizens United is probably one of the more damaging Supreme Court decisions that we have seen. I think ideally for democracy, I'm sorry, I'm bloviating.
no, it's okay.
Um, we should have publicly funded elections, full stop.
Okay. The minimum wage right now, 7.25. That's the federal minimum wage. States have a different rate. But if you make about 12 bucks an hour right now, you work a full hour after taxes, you can't buy a pound of ground beef.
Yep.
That's at the current rate. I kind of set it up like you're a jerk if you say no. But but would you be for raising the minimum wage? And if so, do you have a number in mind?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think the specific number should honestly be pegged to consumer price indexes, right? So it shouldn't be static. We should go ahead, and it probably needs to be phased in order to, because it's going to be a little painful, like there's going to be some economic hits, and we want to go ahead and mitigate those. But we should go ahead and raise the minimum wage until it meets the basic standard right now based off of CPI. And then it stays pegged. That way, if prices go up, well, I can still work a 40-hour week and afford to have a family. Like that's the American dream, right? I can work hard and still have opportunities that I can give to my kids. And I think that's something that we're significantly missing right now.
Yeah. Do you think would you be for some form of universal health care?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is odd that the United States is the only major developed economy that hasn't figured this out. And there are a lot of potential options for us to look at and evaluate what might be the best fit for us because we are a unique country. We have a unique culture, unique economy, and a unique setup. But there's no reason why it should just be a blanket no.
Yeah. What about universal school lunch? Federal funds to every kid in school, no matter their income level, can get a hot meal during the school
100%.
day.
Yep. Education, I mentioned this earlier. I am a huge proponent of education because education has helped me find opportunities that I wouldn't have had without it. And it's really hard to learn when you're hungry. And I have been hungry in my life. I know what that feels like. And no kid should have to go to school and be hungry. Like that's a basic service that we should be able to provide,
Yeah, I every kid should get the joy of pizza day.
right?
Nothing else, man. Fridays, that's it. Like the kid that gets left out on pizza day. Brutal. So let's say, yeah, let's fast forward. It's 2027. You're in Congress. Congratulations, you won. Um, and you co-sponsor a bill to federally fund school lunches, breakfast across the country. It's gets through the House, gets through the Senate, gets on Donald Trump's desk. And he looks at the bill, he calls you into his office, and he says, I'd love to sign this, but I can't do it unless we make one small change. You have to name this the Donald J. Trump Feed the Children School Lunch Program. You do that, I'll sign it. You taking that
Easiest change in my life, right? Like
deal?
if he needs to have the bill named after him so that we can help millions of children, I got no ego in this one. Let's rename it the Donald J. Trump Fed Millions of Americans bill.
Love it. Yeah. Love it. So look, you're in it, right? You're up against it, I should say. 30-point district in 2024. You got a lot of ground to make up. You're not taking corporate money. So you're going to need the power of the people behind you. You're going to need their support, volunteers, money. If somebody wants to get involved, how do they do it? And what's your message? What's your final pitch?
Yeah. So right now, I would say if you want to get involved, the best place is our website, which is petercrosbyforcongress.org. That is the website that we're going to go ahead and direct you to. There'll be social medias that you can engage with. So there's soon to be, depending on when this interview comes out, we'll have an Instagram account, we'll have a Facebook account, Blue Sky account. Reach out to us and talk to us and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I need because really that's my responsibility. If I'm going to be your representative, I need to know what you need because you're going to elect me to serve you. That really is the core of my duty. And I want to just kind of reflect on this one last time. I come from a military background, and I come from a military background that dates back before the foundation of the United States. We've had somebody serving in some capacity since before the US was the US. I was an Eagle, well, I still am. I'm an Eagle Scout. And I came up in the Boy Scouts of America. And there are certain things which have been drilled into me as fundamental values. We have integrity, we have honesty, and as public servants, our responsibility is to serve. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. when you elect somebody to represent you in Congress, as the mayor and city council on your school district, as the president of the United States, their first and last responsibility is to serve. And I would say, I know that you don't know me. That's what part of this hope is with this interview, but I hope that I can earn your trust. I hope that you'll give me the opportunity to earn your trust and say that is somebody I trust will go and do what he can for me, for my family and my community, because I know that at his core, he wants to serve us. That would be my final pitch.
Love it. Love it. Well, Peter, I appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck. It's going to be a tough road to hoe, but yeah, if anybody can do it, I think you're somebody that could. And I'd love to run it back when we get into the general and talk to you again.
Thanks, Al. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. Take it easy. All right.